What did your spouse do when they thought no one was watching? The security footage timestamp read 7:47 a.m., Tuesday morning. I watched my husband Marcus take 3 careful bites of the turkey and avocado sandwich I'd made him at 6:30, chewing thoughtfully before wrapping it back up with a satisfied smile. "This is perfect, Sarah. You're getting so good at this," he said, kissing my cheek before grabbing his briefcase. The next timestamp was 8:23 a.m. Office parking lot camera. I watched him pull the same sandwich from his lunch bag and drop it directly into the dumpster behind Patterson and Associates marketing firm, wrapper and all. Then he straightened his tie and walked inside like nothing happened. I'd been making Marcus lunch for 3 years. Every single morning, I woke up 20 minutes early to carefully craft something I thought he'd enjoy. Turkey with honey mustard on sourdough. Chicken salad with grapes and pecans. Italian sub with all his favorite fixings from that deli on 5th Street. I'd write little notes on napkins, tuck in his favorite cookies, sometimes add a thermos of the soup I'd spend hours perfecting over weekends. "How was lunch?" I'd ask every evening. "Delicious as always, babe." "You're spoiling me," he'd reply without missing a beat. The security system had been my idea after the break-ins on Maple Street last month. "We should protect our home," I told Marcus, who readily agreed. Top-of-the-line cameras with cloud storage and mobile access. I could check on our house anytime, anywhere. I never imagined I'd use them to spy on my own marriage. But last Thursday, when I was reviewing footage from the week to make sure the motion sensors were working properly, I noticed Marcus's routine. Same time every morning. Same casual disposal. Same lie. I spent my lunch break at Panera, watching more footage on my phone. 5 days of evidence. 5 days of my carefully prepared meals ending up in corporate dumpsters while Marcus told me how much he appreciated my improving cooking skills. That's when I decided to follow him. Friday afternoon, I left work early and parked across from his office building. At 12:15 p.m., Marcus emerged with 2 coworkers, Brad from accounting and Jennifer from PR. They walked 4 blocks to Chez Laurent, the French bistro where dinner for one costs more than our weekly grocery budget. Through the window, I watched him order what looked like duck confit and a $30 glass of wine. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could read Marcus's animated gestures, his exaggerated expressions. He was telling a story, and from the way Brad nearly choked on his water laughing, it wasn't a flattering one. About me. About my cooking. When I got home that evening, Marcus was already there, tie loosened, looking perfectly content. "How was your day?" I asked, same as always. "Good. Busy." That lunch really hit the spot, though. The roast beef sandwich was incredible. I had made him tuna salad. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I sat in our kitchen staring at my recipe box. 300 index cards of carefully tested meals, each one annotated with notes about what worked and what didn't. Marcus loved this, written in purple ink. "Make again soon," scrawled in margins. His new favorite, underlined twice. 8 years of marriage. 3 years of lunches. How many other lies had I been swallowing while trying so hard to be the perfect wife? My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus's phone, sent to our shared calendar. "Don't forget promotion dinner at the office next Friday. Catered event to celebrate the Henderson account win." So excited. I smiled for the first time in days. The Henderson account. Marcus had been working on landing that client for 8 months, staying late 3 nights a week, taking calls during dinner, obsessing over presentation details until 2 a.m. It was the biggest potential contract Patterson and Associates had seen in 5 years, a $2.3 million marketing campaign for a luxury hotel chain. And now he'd gotten it. I should have been proud. I should have been planning what dress to wear to celebrate my husband's career-defining moment. Instead, I was researching catering companies at 11 p.m., cross-referencing their availability with my own growing plan. "Babe, you awake?" Marcus rolled over, voice thick with sleep. "Just checking emails," I whispered back, quickly closing the browser tab for Gourmet Solutions Catering. "You work too hard. Come here." He pulled me closer, and I let him, even though every muscle in my body wanted to recoil. "I'm so lucky to have you. Especially with this promotion dinner coming up. Jim Patterson specifically asked if you'd be there." I bragged about what an amazing cook you are. My blood went cold. "You what?" I told him about all those incredible lunches you make me. He was so impressed. Said his wife barely manages cereal in the morning. Marcus chuckled against my shoulder. "I might have oversold your skills a tiny bit, but you know how these work things are. Everyone's always trying to one-up each other." I stared at the ceiling, calculating. What exactly did you tell him? Just that you're this natural chef, always experimenting with new recipes. Really creative stuff. Jim's wife is apparently obsessed with those cooking competition shows, so he was fascinated. He kept asking questions about your techniques and ingredients. Marcus yawned. "Don't worry, you won't have to cook anything. It's fully catered." That's what he thought. Saturday morning, I called Gourmet Solutions Catering and spoke to the owner, Diana Chin. Professional, efficient, booked solid for the next month. However, she said after I explained my situation, carefully edited, "Of course, if you're looking to personally cater a corporate event, I do offer consultation services. Menu planning, prep guidance, equipment rental. It's unconventional, but not unheard of." "How much would that cost?" "For a 50-person dinner? Consultation, equipment, and ingredients, you're looking at around $3,500. Plus my fee for official cancellation of their existing catering contract, which would need to come from the company directly." I thought about our savings account. The $4,200 we'd been setting aside for a European vacation next spring. Marcus had been so excited about touring French vineyards and eating real food for once instead of American garbage. "I'll call you back," I told Diana. Sunday afternoon, I drove to Patterson and Associates. The building was empty except for security, but I knew Marcus kept spare building keys in his desk for late-night work sessions. I borrowed them before when bringing him dinner during his Henderson account marathon sessions. Jim Patterson's office was on the 3rd floor, corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. His desk was meticulously organized, but I wasn't interested in snooping. I just needed the contact information for Monday morning. At 9 a.m. sharp, I called his direct line. Mr. Patterson? This is Sarah Martinez, Marcus's wife. I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly, but Marcus mentioned you were interested in my cooking, and I had an idea about Friday's celebration dinner. 20 minutes later, I had his enthusiastic approval to surprise everyone by personally catering the Henderson account celebration. Jim Patterson was delighted by what he called such a personal touch and exactly the kind of creative thinking this company values. He canceled Gourmet Solutions that afternoon. Marcus had no idea what was coming. Monday evening, Marcus came home practically glowing. Sarah, you're never going to believe this. Jim Patterson called me into his office today and said the most amazing thing. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been researching something called ghost pepper extract and trying to calculate how much would be detectable but not dangerous. Oh? What did he say? He said he was so impressed by what I told him about your cooking that he wanted to make Friday's dinner extra special. So he canceled the original caterer. Marcus loosened his tie, grinning like he'd won the lottery. He's bringing in some high-end place instead. Apparently his wife is obsessed with finding authentic culinary experiences for their dinner parties. My heart hammered against my ribs. That's wonderful, honey. I know, right? It shows how much he respects me, bringing in the expensive caterer just because I mentioned your talent. This promotion is definitely happening, Sarah. I can feel it. Tuesday morning, I made Marcus a particularly elaborate lunch, homemade focaccia bread with herb-crusted chicken, roasted red peppers, and fresh mozzarella. I even included a small container of the basil aioli I'd spent an hour perfecting the night before. Wow, this looks incredible, he said, examining the sandwich with what seemed like genuine appreciation. You've really outdone yourself. I've been practicing, I replied, watching his face carefully. Trying some new techniques I found online. Well, it shows. I'm lucky to have such a talented wife. He kissed my forehead and headed for the door. At 8:24 a.m., the parking lot camera captured him tossing my 2 hours of work into the dumpster with the same casual motion he'd used to discard junk mail. But this time, I was ready. During my lunch break, I drove to Patterson and Associates and waited in the visitor parking area. At 12:10, Marcus emerged with the same group as before, plus 2 additional coworkers I recognized from the office Christmas party. They walked past 3 closer restaurants to reach Chez Laurent. I followed at a distance and took a table in the back corner, hidden behind a decorative screen but with a clear view of their booth. Marcus ordered the pan-seared salmon with truffle risotto, $42, according to the menu. His coworkers were laughing at something he'd said when I walked in. So she spent 3 hours making this gourmet sandwich this morning, Marcus was saying, using air quotes that made my stomach clench. Homemade bread, fancy cheese, the whole production. I swear she thinks she's on one of those cooking shows. Jennifer from PR nearly spit out her wine. Oh my god, Marcus, you're terrible. Does she know how bad it is? Are you kidding? She'd be crushed. She's so proud of her little cooking hobby. He cut into his salmon with theatrical precision. Besides, it's easier this way. She feels useful, I get to eat actual food, everyone wins. But doesn't she wonder why you never gain weight eating 2 lunches? Brad asked. Please. Sarah barely notices what I do. She's too busy planning the next Pinterest recipe to try on me. Marcus raised his glass. To wives who try too hard and husbands who know when to shut up about it. They clinked glasses while my heart cracked like an eggshell. I left the restaurant and drove straight to Diana Chen's office. By 3 p.m., I'd wired her $3,500 and signed a consulting contract that made my hands shake. She walked me through the timeline, menu planning by Wednesday, ingredient procurement Thursday, prep work Friday morning, service that evening. Are you sure about the, creative elements you mentioned? Diana asked, reviewing my notes. Some of these combinations are quite unusual. I'm sure, I replied. My husband has very adventurous taste buds. He was about to find out just how adventurous. Wednesday morning, I made Marcus a simple peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the kind of lunch I used to pack in elementary school. No fancy ingredients, no elaborate preparation. Just white bread, Jif, and grape jelly. This is different, he said, examining it with barely concealed disappointment. I thought I'd try something classic, I replied, watching his face. Sometimes simple is better. Of course, babe. I'm sure it'll be great. But his smile looked forced, and I caught him checking his wallet as he headed out the door. At 8:24 a.m., the parking lot camera showed him hesitating for almost 30 seconds before throwing it away. Even my terrible cooking apparently looked better than admitting he'd been lying for 3 years. I spent the morning at Diana's commercial kitchen, going over the menu one final time. She'd helped me design what she diplomatically called a progression of challenging flavors across 7 courses. Each dish would start normally before taking increasingly dramatic turns. The amuse-bouche will be standard mushroom pâté, Diana explained, checking her notes. But we'll substitute the mushrooms with that fermented fish paste you requested. It'll look identical. And the soup course? Butternut squash bisque, but we're replacing half the squash with pureed durian fruit. The spices should mask the smell until they start eating. I nodded, making notes in my planner. What about the main course? Pan-seared chicken breast with what appears to be herb-crusted coating. The herbs will be a mixture of spirulina powder, nutritional yeast, and just enough ghost pepper extract to create significant heat without causing medical emergencies. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, can't wait for tomorrow night. Jim Patterson told 3 other clients about your cooking. You're famous. Face blowing a kiss. I showed Diana the message. She raised an eyebrow. Your husband really doubled down on this lie, didn't he? That's not even the worst part, I said, then told her about yesterday's lunch surveillance at Chez Laurent. Diana whistled low. Okay, I take back what I said about this being excessive. The man deserves whatever's coming to him. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected complication. Marcus called me at work, voice tight with stress. Sarah, we have a problem. Jim Patterson just told me his wife Eleanor wants to meet you before the dinner tomorrow. She's apparently some kind of foodie blogger and she's excited to discuss culinary techniques with you. My blood went cold. What kind of blogger? I don't know, something about reviewing high-end restaurants around the city. She has like 50,000 followers. Jim says she's been talking about featuring you in some article about hidden culinary gems or something. I sat down hard in my desk chair. This wasn't part of the plan. I'd researched basic cooking terminology, watched a few YouTube videos about plating techniques, but I wasn't prepared to fool an actual food expert. When does she want to meet? Tomorrow at 5:30, an hour before the dinner starts. She wants to watch some of the prep work and ask about your creative process. Marcus's voice carried a note of panic I'd never heard before. Sarah, what if she figures out I've been exaggerating about your skills? What exactly did you tell Jim about my experience? I asked carefully. A long pause. I might have mentioned that you trained at culinary school. And that you've been experimenting with molecular gastronomy. And that you're working on a cookbook. My vision tunneled. You told him I went to culinary school? It just came up in conversation. He was so impressed, and I got carried away. You understand, right? This promotion depends on making the right impression. I understood, all right. Marcus had built an entire fictional version of me to impress his boss, and now reality was about to come crashing down on both of us. Don't worry, I heard myself saying. I'll handle Eleanor Patterson. Really? You're not mad? How could I be mad, honey? You were just trying to make me sound impressive. After I hung up, I called Diana immediately. We have a bigger problem than unusual menu items, I told her. I need a crash course in advanced cooking techniques. Tonight. That evening, I found myself in Diana's test kitchen at 7 p.m., frantically taking notes while she demonstrated techniques I'd never heard of 24 hours ago. Spherification is actually simpler than it looks, Diana explained, dropping what appeared to be a caviar pearl into my palm. It burst on my tongue with intense olive oil flavor. Sodium alginate and calcium chloride. Basic molecular gastronomy. If Eleanor asks, tell her you're exploring the textural possibilities of liquid encapsulation. I wrote down every word, knowing I'd probably butcher the pronunciation. What about the foam? Lecithin foam. 2 grams of soy lecithin powder per 500 milliliters of liquid, then use an immersion blender to create stable bubbles. It's Instagram friendly but technically basic. Diana handed me a spoon topped with what looked like green clouds. Taste this. The foam dissolved immediately, leaving behind an intense basil flavor that made my homemade pesto seem like lawn clippings. Jesus, that's incredible. Right? Food bloggers love this stuff because it photographs well. If Eleanor starts asking detailed questions, pivot to talking about flavor profiles and textural contrasts. Those phrases cover a multitude of sins. We spent 3 hours running through techniques, terminology, and plating presentations. Diana taught me to hold a squeeze bottle properly, how to create those artistic sauce dots I'd seen on cooking shows, and most importantly, how to sound competent while describing completely made-up processes. Remember, she said as I gathered my notes at 10 p.m., competence sells more than competence in this industry. Eleanor Patterson might have 50,000 followers, but she's still just a blogger, not a trained chef. As long as you can explain why you made specific choices, she'll probably be impressed by the creativity. I drove home rehearsing phrases like umami depth and aromatic complexity, wondering how my simple plan for revenge had turned into this elaborate performance art piece. Marcus was waiting up for me, which never happened on weekday nights. Where were you? I tried calling twice. Girls' night with Rebecca, I lied smoothly. We lost track of time at that new wine bar downtown. Oh. He looked relieved. I was worried something happened. With tomorrow being so important and all. Speaking of tomorrow, I should probably get some rest. Big day of cooking ahead of me. Marcus grabbed my hand as I headed toward the stairs. Sarah, I just want you to know how grateful I am. The way you're stepping up for this dinner, dealing with Eleanor Patterson, supporting my career, it means everything to me. Looking at his earnest face, I felt a strange mixture of love and revulsion. This was the man I'd married 8 years ago, the one who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings and leave sweet notes in my purse. But he was also the man who'd been throwing away my food and mocking my efforts to his coworkers for 3 years. I just want you to be successful, honey. I know. And after tomorrow night, everything's going to change for us. Jim hinted that this promotion comes with a $40,000 raise. We could finally afford that kitchen renovation you've been wanting. The kitchen renovation. I'd been dropping hints about new appliances and better counter space for 2 years, dreaming of a place where I could really learn to cook properly. Marcus had always said we couldn't afford it. Apparently, we could afford $42 lunch entrees at Chez Laurent twice a week, though. That would be wonderful, I managed. Thursday morning, I made Marcus scrambled eggs with toast, simple, hard to mess up, impossible to critique. But I also packed his favorite cookies from the bakery downtown, the ones that cost $3 each. Special treat for a special day, I said, tucking them into his lunch bag alongside the eggs. At 8:24 a.m., I watched him throw the entire meal away, cookies and all. $6 of bakery treats landing in the dumpster like they were moldy leftovers. I spent the day at Diana's kitchen, prepping ingredients and running through the evening's timeline. The amuse-bouche components were chilling. The durian-spiked soup base was simmering. The ghost pepper coating for the chicken had been tested 3 times to ensure it would be memorable without requiring medical intervention. You realize there's no going back after tonight, Diana said around 3 p.m., watching me practice plating techniques on dummy dishes. Whatever happens with your marriage, this dinner is going to be legendary at Patterson and Associates for years to come. I know. I piped a perfect rosette of what appeared to be herb butter onto a practice plate. Either Marcus learns to tell the truth, or everyone learns what a liar he is. I'm okay with both outcomes. At 4 p.m., my phone rang. Jim Patterson. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but Eleanor is beside herself with excitement about tonight. She's been researching molecular gastronomy techniques all week to prepare for your conversation. My stomach dropped to my shoes. She's done research? Oh yes, she takes her food writing very seriously. She's particularly interested in discussing your use of transglutaminase and liquid nitrogen applications. I told her you're quite innovative with both. I had no idea what transglutaminase was. Liquid nitrogen sounded like something that could kill people. Mr. Patterson, I said carefully, I should probably focus on final preparations this afternoon. Perhaps Eleanor and I could discuss techniques over dinner instead? Of course. She'll love experiencing your work firsthand. See you at 5:30. I hung up and immediately called Diana. We have a code red situation, I told her. Eleanor Patterson has been researching molecular gastronomy all week. She's going to ask about transglutaminase and liquid nitrogen. Shit. Diana was quiet for a moment. Okay, here's what you need to know. Transglutaminase is meat glue, it binds proteins together. Liquid nitrogen is for flash freezing and creating dramatic smoking effects. If she brings them up, tell her you prefer more subtle techniques that let the natural flavors shine through. Will that work? It better. Because in 2 hours, you're going to be face to face with a food blogger who's done her homework, serving a 7-course meal designed to torture your lying husband while convincing 50 other people that you're a culinary genius. I looked at my reflection in the kitchen's stainless steel surface. 24 hours ago, I'd been a marketing executive who made decent sandwiches. Tonight, I was going to pull off the most elaborate deception of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 5:15 p.m., I stood in the Patterson and Associates conference room, watching Diana's catering staff arrange my 7 courses of culinary warfare on warming trays. The amuse-bouche looked innocuous enough, elegant little rounds of what appeared to be mushroom pâté on toast points. Only Diana and I knew they contained enough fermented fish paste to clear sinuses from 3 counties away. You've got this, Diana whispered, adjusting the placement of the soup tureens. Remember, if Eleanor gets too technical, pivot to talking about your philosophy of flavor harmony. It sounds profound and means absolutely nothing. My hands were shaking as I smoothed my black cocktail dress, the one Marcus always said made me look sophisticated. Tonight, I needed every ounce of sophistication I could manufacture. The conference room door opened and Jim Patterson walked in with a woman who could only be Eleanor. She was exactly what I'd expected, perfectly blown-out blonde hair, designer handbag that probably cost more than my car payment, and the predatory smile of someone who'd built a career on finding flaws in other people's work. Sarah. Finally. Eleanor rushed over with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever spotting a tennis ball. Jim has told me so much about your innovative techniques. I've been absolutely dying to meet you. The pleasure is mine, I managed, shaking her manicured hand. I'm excited to share tonight's menu with everyone. I have to ask, Eleanor pulled out her phone, would you mind if I took some behind-the-scenes photos for my blog? My followers are obsessed with meeting undiscovered culinary talent. This could be huge for your career. My career. The imaginary culinary career that Marcus had invented to impress his boss. Of course, I heard myself saying. Though I prefer to let the food speak for itself. Modest. I love that. Eleanor started snapping photos of the warming trays. Now, I've been reading about spherification techniques all week. Are you working with sodium alginate in any of tonight's courses? Diana had prepared me for this exact question. I find that molecular gastronomy can overshadow the natural integrity of the ingredients, I replied, hoping I sounded thoughtful rather than terrified. Tonight's menu focuses more on unexpected flavor combinations and textural contrasts. Brilliant approach. So many chefs get caught up in the theatrics and lose sight of the actual eating experience. Eleanor made a note on her phone. What's your background? Jim mentioned you trained professionally? The lie that was about to destroy everything. I glanced toward the door, where early guests were starting to arrive. Marcus stood near the entrance in his best navy suit, greeting coworkers with the confidence of a man whose promotion was practically guaranteed. I prefer to let my food tell that story, I said, which wasn't technically a lie since tonight's food was definitely going to tell a story. Just not the one anyone expected. Mysterious. I can work with that angle. Eleanor wandered over to examine the first course more closely. These look incredible. The presentation is so clean and elegant. She picked up one of the amuse-bouche and held it toward the light, examining it like a gemologist appraising a diamond. My heart hammered as she brought it closer to her nose. Interesting, she murmured. There's something almost oceanic about the aroma. Very complex. Umami depth, I said quickly, remembering Diana's coaching. I like to layer flavors that create conversation on the palate. Gorgeous concept. Eleanor set the piece back down and turned to me with sparkling eyes. Sarah, I have a proposition. My blog reaches 53,000 food enthusiasts across the tri-state area. After tonight, I'd love to do a full-feature article about your work. Maybe even arrange some pop-up dinner opportunities with my restaurant contacts. The room started to spin slightly. This had spiraled so far beyond my original plan that I couldn't even see the edges anymore. I'd wanted to embarrass Marcus in front of his coworkers, not launch a fake culinary career that would inevitably collapse the moment anyone asked me to actually cook something edible. That's very generous, I managed. Let's see how tonight goes first. Of course. But I have a good feeling about this. Eleanor squeezed my arm conspiratorially. Between you and me, Jim Patterson has been telling everyone who'll listen that his star employee has a wife who's destined for Food Network fame. The pressure must be intense. Food Network fame. Jesus Christ, how deep had Marcus dug this hole? Marcus tends to exaggerate my talents, I said carefully. Oh, honey, that's what good husbands do. My Richard still tells people I could have been a professional dancer, even though I can barely manage a waltz. Eleanor laughed, then leaned in closer. But from what I can see here, Marcus isn't exaggerating at all. This spread looks restaurant quality. Across the room, Marcus caught my eye and gave me an encouraging thumbs up. He looked so proud, so confident that his brilliant wife was about to cement his professional reputation with her incredible cooking skills. He had no idea that in approximately 45 minutes, the first course would hit the table and his carefully constructed web of lies would start unraveling one horrifying bite at a time. The dinner officially began at 6:30 p.m. with 52 people seated around the elaborately decorated conference room. I counted them twice, Patterson and Associates executives, their spouses, 3 potential clients Marcus had mentioned, and a handful of colleagues I recognized from office parties. All of them expecting an elegant celebration dinner prepared by Marcus's incredibly talented wife. I stood at the front of the room with Diana discreetly positioned near the kitchen doors, ready to coordinate service. Jim Patterson tapped his wine glass with a knife, calling for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin this celebration of the Henderson account success, I want to introduce someone very special. Marcus Martinez has been telling us for months about his wife Sarah's extraordinary culinary talents, and tonight we're privileged to experience her artistry firsthand. Polite applause rippled through the room. Marcus beamed at me from his seat at the head table, completely oblivious to what was coming. Eleanor Patterson sat 2 seats away, her phone ready to document everything for her food blog. Sarah has graciously agreed to prepare tonight's menu personally, Jim continued, featuring what I'm told are some highly innovative techniques. Sarah, would you like to say a few words about your vision for this evening? Every face in the room turned toward me expectantly. Marcus's co-workers, their spouses, the potential clients worth millions to the company. All waiting to hear from the culinary genius who'd been perfecting her craft through years of devoted lunch preparation. Thank you, Jim, I began, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Tonight's menu represents a journey through unexpected flavor experiences. Each course is designed to challenge preconceptions about familiar ingredients and combinations. That wasn't even a lie. These dishes would definitely challenge preconceptions. I believe the best cooking comes from honesty, being truthful about ingredients, techniques, and especially about what we're actually serving to the people we care about. I glanced directly at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. So tonight, I promise you'll taste exactly what I prepared, with no pretense or deception. More applause. Diana caught my eye and gave a subtle nod toward the kitchen doors. Showtime. Let's begin with our amuse-bouche, I announced. A celebration of umami depth featuring what appears to be wild mushroom pâté on artisanal crostini. Diana's staff began distributing the small plates, each one holding 3 elegant rounds of what looked like high-end restaurant fare. I watched faces around the room as people examined the presentation, heard murmurs of approval about the plating and garnish work. Marcus picked up his first piece and held it toward the light, exactly like Eleanor had done earlier. Look at this attention to detail, he told Brad from accounting. This is the kind of thing Sarah does every single day. I'm spoiled rotten. Every single day? Asked Jennifer from PR, raising an eyebrow. She cooks like this regularly? Oh, absolutely. The lunches she makes me are incredible. Restaurant quality, every morning. Marcus bit into his amuse-bouche without hesitation. The change in his expression was instantaneous. His eyes widened, then began to water. He stopped chewing completely, holding the partially masticated food in his mouth like it might explode if he moved wrong. Around the room, other guests were having similar reactions. The fermented fish paste that Diana had warned me about was apparently even more potent than we'd calculated. Eleanor Patterson had gone completely pale and was reaching desperately for her water glass. Oh my, said Mrs. Henderson from the client table, pressing her napkin delicately to her lips. This is certainly bold. Marcus was staring at me with a look of pure panic, still unable to swallow his first bite. His face had turned an alarming shade of red, and sweat was beading on his forehead. The umami profile is quite intense, I explained calmly to the room. I find that challenging the palate immediately creates a more memorable dining experience. This particular preparation uses traditional fermentation techniques to concentrate the oceanic flavors. Oceanic is definitely the word, muttered someone from the back table. Jim Patterson had managed to swallow his portion, though he looked like it had taken considerable effort. Sarah, this is certainly unlike anything I've ever tasted. Very avant-garde. Thank you. I believe food should provoke genuine reactions rather than polite indifference. I nodded to Diana, who began clearing the amuse-bouche plates with professional efficiency. Several guests looked visibly relieved to see them go. Eleanor Patterson had recovered enough to start taking notes on her phone, though her hands were still shaking slightly. This is fascinating, she said, though her voice sounded strained. Such an aggressive opening statement. Very confident. Marcus finally managed to swallow, immediately draining his entire water glass. When he looked at me again, there was something different in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. For the first time in our marriage, my husband was questioning whether he actually knew me at all. The next course, I announced, will be our butternut squash bisque with truffle oil and herbs. A more traditional preparation to balance the intensity of our opening. But as Diana's staff began ladling the durian-laced soup into bowls, I saw Marcus's hands trembling slightly as he reached for his wine glass. He was starting to realize that something was very, very wrong with his wife's incredible cooking. The real show was just beginning. The soup course revealed the true scope of my husband's deception. As Diana's staff placed the innocent-looking butternut squash bisque in front of each guest, I watched Marcus attempt to compose himself from the amuse-bouche disaster. His face had returned to a normal color, but his hands still trembled slightly as he adjusted his napkin. This smells wonderful, Sarah, called out Mrs. Henderson, leaning over her bowl appreciatively. Much more approachable than the first course. Several guests nodded in agreement, lifting their spoons with renewed confidence. The durian fruit I'd incorporated was masked beautifully by the traditional squash and spice blend. Diana had been right about that. To the nose, it smelled like perfectly executed restaurant bisque. Marcus took his first spoonful without hesitation, clearly desperate to redeem the situation after his dramatic reaction to the fish paste. I watched his face carefully as he swallowed, waiting for the delayed impact that Diana had warned me about. See? Marcus said to Brad, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. This is more like what Sarah usually makes for me. She has this incredible instinct for balancing flavors that... He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes went wide with horror as the durian's distinctive taste hit his palate fully. Around the room, other guests were beginning to experience the same delayed revelation. Oh God, whispered Jennifer from PR, pressing her napkin to her mouth. What does that taste? Eleanor Patterson had gone green around the edges. She was staring into her soup bowl like it contained actual poison, her food blogger composure completely shattered. This flavor profile is challenging, I supplied helpfully. I've incorporated some Asian influences that create unexpected depth. The fermented notes complement the traditional squash base. Fermented? Jim Patterson's voice cracked slightly. He'd managed 2 spoonfuls before the full durian experience kicked in. Sarah, I have to ask, what exactly is fermented in this recipe? Marcus was staring at me across the room with naked panic in his eyes. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph, the dinner that secured his promotion and showcased his wife's amazing talents. Instead, he was watching his career prospects dissolve in real time as 52 people struggled not to spit out my gourmet soup. It's a traditional Southeast Asian fruit that adds complexity, I explained, maintaining perfect composure while chaos erupted around me. I find that most American palates aren't familiar with it, which creates an educational opportunity. Educational, repeated Mr. Henderson weakly. His wife had abandoned all pretense and was actually spitting into her napkin. But then something unexpected happened. Eleanor Patterson straightened in her chair, wiped her mouth deliberately, and started typing furiously on her phone. This is brilliant, she announced suddenly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of distress. Absolutely brilliant. The room fell silent. Marcus looked like he was about to faint. Think about it, Eleanor continued, warming to her theme. How often do we attend these corporate dinners and eat the same boring rubber chicken and predictable sides? Sarah is forcing us to confront our own culinary prejudices. She's making us question why we consider certain flavor profiles acceptable while dismissing others as foreign or difficult. I stared at her, genuinely speechless. This wasn't part of my plan. The opening course challenged our assumptions about umami intensity, Eleanor continued, now addressing the entire room like she was delivering a TED talk. And now the soup is confronting our Western bias against unfamiliar ingredients. It's food as social commentary. Several guests were nodding slowly, though they still looked nauseated. Jim Patterson set down his spoon and leaned back thoughtfully. You know, Eleanor makes an interesting point. Sarah, are you intentionally creating discomfort to make us examine our own food prejudices? Marcus was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. In 8 years of marriage, he'd never heard me discuss food philosophy or social commentary. Hell, until this week, the most adventurous thing in my cooking repertoire had been adding oregano to Jared pasta sauce. I believe good food should make people think, I said carefully, not just fill their stomachs. Diana appeared at my elbow, professional and calm despite the chaos surrounding us. Shall we clear for the next course, she whispered. As the soup bowls disappeared, I noticed Marcus pulling out his phone under the table. He was texting frantically, probably trying to figure out how to salvage this disaster. What he didn't know was that we still had 5 courses to go. And the ghost pepper chicken was going to make the durian soup seem like vanilla ice cream. The third course was where Marcus's lies began to multiply exponentially. As Diana's team brought out the salad course, mixed greens with what appeared to be candied walnuts and goat cheese, I watched my husband's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Relief that we'd moved past the soup disaster, anxiety about what might come next, and something new, active deception. You know what? Marcus announced loudly to his table, dabbing his forehead with his napkin. Sarah's been experimenting with these bold flavors at home for months. I've been encouraging her to push boundaries like this. Brad from accounting raised an eyebrow. Really? Because 5 minutes ago you looked like you were going to throw up. That's just my face when I'm really concentrating on flavor notes, Marcus replied without missing a beat. Sarah's taught me to analyze each component separately before forming an opinion. I watched him take his first bite of salad, which Diana had assured me was completely normal except for one small detail. We'd replaced the goat cheese with an aged cheese that had been sitting in her walk-in cooler for 3 weeks past its expiration date. Not dangerous, just memorably pungent. Marcus chewed thoughtfully for exactly 4 seconds before his expression shifted to barely controlled panic. But instead of stopping, he took another bite. Then another. The cheese selection is particularly inspired tonight, honey, he called out to me across the room, his voice pitched slightly higher than normal. Really showcases your understanding of aging processes. Eleanor Patterson was frantically typing notes while chewing. Marcus, you're so lucky to have someone who challenges your palate regularly. Most couples get stuck in boring food routines. Oh, we never had that problem, Marcus laughed, though sweat was beading on his forehead again. Sarah's always surprising me. Every single lunch she makes is an adventure. Jennifer from PR leaned forward with interest. What kind of lunches does she make you? I'm always looking for inspiration. I held my breath. This was the moment Marcus could come clean, admit he'd been exaggerating, walk back the increasingly elaborate lies he'd been building all evening. Instead, he doubled down. Just this morning she made this incredible focaccia sandwich with herb-crusted chicken and homemade aioli, he said, describing the exact lunch I'd watched him throw away 8 hours earlier. The bread alone took her 2 hours to prepare. She gets up early just to make sure everything is perfect. 2 hours? Mrs. Henderson looked impressed despite her lingering nausea from the soup. That's real dedication. She's passionate about her craft, Marcus replied, maintaining eye contact with me across the room. There was something challenging in his gaze now, like he was daring me to contradict his story. Sometimes I tell her she doesn't need to go to such elaborate efforts, but she insists. Says cooking for someone is the ultimate expression of love. My chest tightened with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He was not only perpetuating the lie about enjoying my food, but now he was claiming I'd said things I'd never said, creating an entire fictional philosophy about my motivations. That's beautiful, Eleanor sighed, still typing. Sarah, is that really how you view cooking? As a love language? Every face in the room turned toward me again. Marcus was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part desperation, part warning, part genuine curiosity about how I'd respond to his fabrication. I think honesty is the most important ingredient in any relationship, I replied, holding his gaze steadily. When someone consistently tells you they love what you're giving them, you keep giving it, don't you? Exactly. Marcus agreed enthusiastically, completely missing the subtext. Sarah's generosity in the kitchen is just one of the reasons I fell in love with her. Jim Patterson smiled warmly. You two make quite a team. Marcus raves about your cooking at least twice a week in the office. Twice a week. While throwing away my lunches daily and spending $40 on restaurant meals, Marcus had been actively building his reputation as the grateful husband of a culinary genius. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. I just hope tonight's menu lives up to his descriptions, I said sweetly. Diana appeared beside me again, and I could see barely contained amazement in her eyes. She'd been watching the entire performance unfold. Ready for the main course, she whispered. I looked out at the room full of people who were about to discover exactly what Marcus had been raving about twice a week. The ghost pepper chicken was plated and waiting. Absolutely, I replied. I think it's time for the real showstopper. The main course arrived with theatrical precision. Diana's staff placed identical white plates in front of each guest, pan-seared chicken breast with what appeared to be an elegant herb crust, accompanied by roasted vegetables and a delicate reduction sauce. It looked like something from a five-star restaurant, which made what was about to happen even more devastating. I'd tested the ghost pepper coating 3 times to ensure it wouldn't send anyone to the hospital, but Diana had warned me, the heat builds slowly, then hits like a freight train. By the time they realize what's happening, they've already swallowed it. Marcus was practically glowing with relief as he examined his plate. After 2 courses of barely controlled disaster, here was something that looked completely normal, the kind of dish that might actually justify his months of bragging about my cooking skills. Now this is more like it, he announced to his table, cutting into the chicken with confidence. This is exactly the kind of thing Sarah makes for special occasions. Look at that presentation. Eleanor Patterson was photographing her plate from multiple angles. The plating is absolutely restaurant quality, Sarah. Where did you study presentation techniques? Another landmine question. I've learned everything I knew about plating from Diana's 3-hour crash course yesterday. I believe presentation should serve the food, not the other way around, I replied, which sounded profound and meant absolutely nothing. The real artistry is in the flavor development. Philosophy and technique, Eleanor murmured approvingly, making another note. This is definitely feature article material. Marcus took his first substantial bite, chewing thoughtfully with the exaggerated appreciation of a man performing for an audience. The herb crust has incredible depth, he announced. Sarah's been perfecting this technique for months. Around the room, other guests were following suit, cutting and tasting with the cautious optimism of people who'd survived 2 courses of culinary warfare. Mrs. Henderson took a delicate bite. Jim Patterson nodded approvingly as he chewed. Even Brad from accounting looked pleasantly surprised. For approximately 30 seconds, it seemed like I might have accidentally served something edible. Then the ghost pepper extract began its work. The transformation was gradual at first. Marcus's confident chewing slowed slightly, his brow furrowing as if he was trying to identify an unexpected flavor. Around the room, I watched similar expressions of confusion begin to spread. Eleanor Patterson was the first to react visibly, her eyes widening as she reached for her water glass. Oh, she said quietly. Oh my. Is everything, Jim Patterson began, then stopped abruptly as his own portion kicked in. His face flushed deep red within seconds. Marcus was still trying to maintain his performance, taking another bite even as tears began forming in his eyes. The heat level is perfect, he gasped, his voice strained. Sarah knows I love spicy food. But the ghost pepper extract wasn't finished with him. I watched my husband's face cycle through increasingly desperate expressions as the heat built beyond anything he'd ever experienced. His hand shook as he reached for his wine, then his water, then Jennifer's water when his own glass proved insufficient. Jesus Christ, Brad wheezed, abandoning all pretense of politeness. What is in this chicken? Ghost pepper, I replied calmly, watching 52 people simultaneously realize they were in serious trouble. It's a traditional Indian ingredient that measures around 1 million Scoville units. I thought it would add an interesting dimension to the herb crust. The room erupted into chaos. People were gasping, crying, desperately searching for anything to cool their mouths. Diana's staff, prepared for this moment, began distributing glasses of milk and bowls of yogurt with practiced efficiency. But Marcus was still eating. Even as tears streamed down his face and his entire head turned crimson, he continued cutting and chewing his chicken, maintaining his desperate charade. This is amazing, Sarah, he croaked between bites, his voice barely audible. Really showcases your understanding of heat profiles. Eleanor Patterson, despite her obvious distress, was frantically typing on her phone with one hand while downing milk with the other. This is incredible, she gasped. The commitment to the artistic vision, even when it's literally painful to experience. I stared at my husband as he forced down another bite of ghost pepper chicken, and something inside me broke completely. This wasn't just about the lunches anymore. This was about a man so committed to his lies that he'd rather suffer in agony than admit the truth. The final 4 courses were waiting in the kitchen, each one more elaborate than the last. And Marcus was going to eat every single bite. The chaos in the conference room had reached a crescendo, but somehow Marcus was still performing. Through streaming tears and visible trembling, he managed another bite of the ghost pepper chicken while half the room had abandoned their plates entirely. Marcus, Jim Patterson gasped, clutching a glass of milk like a lifeline, you don't have to finish that. I think we all understand Sarah's artistic vision. No, Marcus wheezed, his voice barely recognizable. Sarah worked so hard on this. She gets up at 5:30 every morning to practice these techniques before making my lunch. Another lie. I hadn't gotten up before 6:15 in 3 years. Eleanor Patterson, despite her obvious distress, was watching Marcus with fascination. The dedication is remarkable, she managed between gulps of yogurt. Both of you. This level of heat requires serious commitment to experience properly. That's when Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Marcus's sister and a psychology professor at the local university, stood up from the back table. I'd forgotten she was even invited until I saw her walking toward the front of the room with the measured pace of someone who just figured something out. Marcus, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Can I talk to you for a second? Kind of busy here, Becca, Marcus replied, gesturing weakly at his plate. His face was now purple red and sweat was pouring down his temples, but he was still holding his fork. It'll just take a minute. Rebecca's tone carried the authority of someone used to dealing with difficult patients. Sarah, would you mind if I borrowed your husband? Every instinct screamed at me to say no. We were 4 courses into my elaborate revenge, and Marcus was finally experiencing consequences for 3 years of deception. But Rebecca wasn't just anyone, she was family, and she had a look in her eyes that suggested she'd connected dots I hadn't expected anyone to notice. Of course, I heard myself saying. Rebecca led Marcus toward the corner of the room, near the windows overlooking downtown. I couldn't hear their conversation over the general commotion of 50 people trying to recover from ghost pepper poisoning, but I could see Marcus's body language. The defensive posture. The rapid head shaking. The moment when his shoulders sagged in defeat. When they returned to the front of the room 5 minutes later, Marcus looked like a different person entirely. The manic performance energy was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in my husband's face before, genuine shame. Everyone, Rebecca announced, her voice carrying easily over the lingering chaos. I think we need to pause for a moment. There's something my brother needs to say. Jim Patterson looked up from his milk glass, confused. Rebecca, this really isn't necessary. We understand that experimental cuisine can be challenging. It's not about the food, Rebecca interrupted gently. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not angry, but not sympathetic either. Is it, Marcus? The room fell silent except for the occasional cough or sniffle from the ghost pepper casualties. Marcus stood frozen beside his sister, staring at the floor like it might open up and swallow him. Marcus has been lying to all of you, Rebecca said when it became clear he wasn't going to speak. About Sarah's cooking. About the lunches. About everything. Eleanor Patterson's phone clattered to the table. What? Marcus finally raised his head, and when he looked at me, I saw 8 years of marriage collapsing in his eyes. Sarah knows, he whispered. She's known all along. That's what tonight is really about. The conference room erupted into confused murmurs, but all I could focus on was Diana's face near the kitchen doors. She was holding the serving trays for the 5th course, dessert ravioli filled with wasabi paste and durian cream. For more courses of elaborate torture, suddenly rendered meaningless by 30 seconds of truth. The silence that followed Marcus's confession felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. 52 pairs of eyes moved between my husband and me like spectators at a tennis match, trying to process what they'd just heard. I don't understand, Mrs. Henderson said finally, her voice still hoarse from the ghost pepper. Marcus has been lying about what? Marcus looked at me desperately, as if I might somehow save him from having to explain. When I remained silent, he turned back to the room with the defeated posture of a man walking to his execution. Sarah makes me lunch every morning, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Beautiful, elaborate lunches. Homemade bread, gourmet ingredients, little notes telling me to have a good day. He paused, swallowing hard. And I throw them away. Every single day for 3 years, I drive to work and throw them in the dumpster behind our building. The shocked intake of breath from 50 people was audible. Eleanor Patterson's mouth had fallen open, her food blogger composure completely shattered. Then I go to expensive restaurants and complain to my coworkers about how terrible her cooking is, Marcus continued, the words tumbling out like he couldn't stop them. I told Brad she once made me a sandwich so dry I couldn't swallow it. I told Jennifer her soup tasted like dishwater. I told everyone who would listen that my wife was a terrible cook who thought she was good at it. But you told us she was amazing, Jim Patterson said slowly, his face pale with more than just ghost pepper residue. You said she was practically a professional chef. Because I thought it would impress you. Marcus's voice cracked. When you mentioned your wife's cooking blog, I panicked. I made up stories about Sarah's skills to sound more sophisticated. More like the kind of employee who deserves a promotion. The room erupted into chaos again, but this time it wasn't from culinary assault. Voices rose in confusion and outrage as people began processing the implications of what they'd just heard. So tonight's menu. Eleanor began, her journalistic instincts kicking in despite everything. Is Sarah's revenge, Rebecca finished quietly. She found out about the lies and decided to give everyone a taste of what Marcus has actually been experiencing. Except she hasn't been experiencing it, because her cooking was never this terrible. All eyes turned to me. Diana was still frozen by the kitchen doors, holding trays of wasabi ravioli that would never be served. The elaborate plan I'd spent a week orchestrating had just collapsed in 5 minutes of unexpected honesty. Sarah, Jim Patterson said carefully, is this true? Have you been deliberately serving us inedible food as some kind of test? I looked around the room at faces streaked with tears from ghost pepper exposure, at my sister-in-law's knowing expression, at my husband's complete breakdown. At Eleanor Patterson, whose 53,000 followers were expecting a story about discovering culinary genius, not marital deception. I make Marcus a turkey sandwich with honey mustard most mornings, I said finally. Sometimes chicken salad. Occasionally leftover soup in a thermos. I've never used molecular gastronomy or ghost pepper extract or fermented fish paste in my life before this week. Then what we just ate, Mr. Henderson began, was designed to be as horrible as possible while looking professional, I admitted. I hired Diana Chen from Gourmet Solutions to help me create 7 courses of elaborate torture disguised as fine dining. Marcus was staring at me with something approaching awe. 7 courses? We've only had 4. I gestured toward the kitchen where Diana still stood with the remaining trays. Dessert ravioli with wasabi filling. Coffee infused with cayenne and bitter herbs. Petit fours made with salt instead of sugar. And a final course I was calling truth tartlets, basically inedible pastries that look beautiful but taste like regret. The room fell silent again as everyone processed the scope of what had almost happened. 3 more courses of culinary warfare, served to the most important people in my husband's professional life. My God, Sarah, Jim Patterson whispered. You've been planning this all week? Since Tuesday morning, when I watched the security footage of Marcus throwing away a sandwich I spent 2 hours making. I looked directly at my husband. A sandwich he told me was perfect before he left the house. Marcus closed his eyes, and I saw 8 years of marriage hanging in the balance between us. The silence stretched until Eleanor Patterson suddenly started laughing. Not the polite chuckle of someone trying to defuse tension, but genuine, uncontrolled laughter that made her double over in her chair. This is the best story I've gotten in 3 years, she gasped between fits of giggles. Do you have any idea how boring most food events are? Bland chicken, predictable wine pairings, the same conversations about locally sourced ingredients. She wiped tears from her eyes, though whether from laughter or lingering ghost pepper, I couldn't tell. This is honest-to-God performance art. Eleanor, Jim Patterson said sharply, this is a serious situation. My employee has been lying to everyone, and his wife just poisoned half our client list. Poisoned? Eleanor stood up, still grinning. Jim, nobody's been poisoned. We've been challenged. When's the last time food made you feel something this intense? She gestured around the room. Look at everyone. Nobody's checking their phones, nobody's making small talk about quarterly reports. Sarah created an experience that none of us will ever forget. An experience that nearly sent me to the emergency room, Brad muttered, still clutching his milk glass. Oh please, Rebecca interjected, her psychology professor voice cutting through the complaints. You've all eaten spicier food at that Thai place downtown. The only difference is tonight you weren't expecting it. She looked around the room with clinical interest. What Sarah did was expose everyone's assumptions about authenticity, performance, and social dining expectations. Mrs. Henderson raised a shaky hand. I'm sorry, but I still don't understand why we had to suffer through fermented fish paste to make a point about marriage problems. That's when Diana finally stepped forward from the kitchen doors, her professional composure intact despite the chaos. Because Marcus made this about more than just marriage, she said calmly. Sarah, show them the receipts. I'd forgotten about the folder Diana had prepared. I pulled it from my purse with trembling hands, credit card statements I'd printed yesterday afternoon, highlighted in yellow. Chez Laurent, I read aloud. Tuesday, March 15th, $67.45. Thursday, March 17th, $72.30. Tuesday, March 22nd, $58.90. I looked up at Marcus, who had gone completely white. That's just last month. The pattern goes back 18 months, twice a week, every week. Jim Patterson's face darkened as he did the math. That's over $500 a month on lunch. While I spent $40 a week on groceries to make his meals, I continued. And stayed up until midnight researching recipes I thought he'd enjoy. And got up at 6 a.m. to prep ingredients before work. My voice was getting stronger now, fed by months of suppressed frustration. Marcus told me we couldn't afford the kitchen renovation I wanted. Said we needed to be more careful with money. Sarah, Marcus whispered, but I wasn't finished. He told Jennifer from PR that I made sandwiches so dry he couldn't swallow them. Told Brad my soup tasted like dishwater. Told the entire office that his wife was delusional about her cooking abilities. I pulled out my phone and showed the room the security footage I'd saved. While spending $1,200 a month on restaurant meals and telling me he was grateful for my terrible food. Eleanor was typing furiously again. Sarah, this is incredible. You've documented everything. The financial deception, the emotional manipulation, the public humiliation. Eleanor, stop, Jim Patterson snapped. This isn't material for your blog. This is a private family matter that got out of hand. Got out of hand? I stared at him incredulously. Jim, your employee has been stealing from your petty cash account to pay for his restaurant lunches. Check the March expense reports. Client meeting at Chez Laurent, except he was there with Brad and Jennifer, not clients. Marcus made a strangled sound. Sarah, how did you? The same way I found out about everything else. I started paying attention. The room erupted into whispers as the full scope of Marcus's deception became clear. This wasn't just about hurt feelings over rejected lunches. This was about systematic lying, financial fraud, and professional misconduct that had been building for years. And we still had 3 courses of weaponized dessert waiting in the kitchen. The room fell into a stunned silence as the implications of Marcus's financial deception sank in. I watched Jim Patterson's face cycle through confusion, anger, and what looked like genuine disgust. This wasn't just about marital problems anymore. This was about an employee who'd been falsifying expense reports for over a year. Marcus, Jim's voice was deadly quiet. Are you telling me you've been billing the company for fake client lunches? My husband looked like he might vomit, and for once it had nothing to do with my cooking. Jim, I can explain. The Henderson account meetings, Brad interrupted suddenly, his accounting brain clearly putting pieces together. You submitted receipts for 3 separate client lunches at Chez Laurent during the Henderson negotiations. But Mr. Henderson told me yesterday that you never took him to lunch anywhere. Oh God, Marcus whispered, sinking into his chair. Eleanor was practically vibrating with excitement, her food blogger persona completely abandoned in favor of investigative journalist. How much are we talking about, Sarah? Total? I pulled out the second folder Diana had helped me prepare, 18 months of credit card statements cross-referenced with Marcus's expense reports. Conservative estimate? $22,000 in fraudulent lunch receipts. He'd eat with coworkers, then submit the bills as client entertainment expenses. $22,000? Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked. While telling his wife they couldn't afford a kitchen renovation? The renovation estimate was $18,000, I confirmed. Marcus told me we'd have to wait at least 2 years to save up that much money. Jim Patterson was staring at Marcus like he'd never seen him before. You've been stealing from the company for 18 months. To pay for expensive lunches. While lying to your wife about her cooking. And then lying to us about your wife being some kind of culinary genius. And don't forget the part where he mocked Sarah's efforts to his coworkers, Rebecca added helpfully. That's emotional abuse with a side of financial fraud. Marcus finally found his voice. It started small. Just a few expensive lunches when I was stressed about the Henderson account. Then it became easier to expense them than to explain to Sarah why I wasn't eating her food. The lies just snowballed. Snowballed? I stared at him in disbelief. Marcus, you told Jim I went to culinary school. You said I was working on a cookbook. You convinced Eleanor I was some kind of molecular gastronomy expert. That's not snowballing, that's constructing an alternate reality. Diana stepped forward again, still holding the wasabi ravioli trays. Should I dispose of the remaining courses? It seems like we've accomplished the evening's objectives. Actually, Eleanor said, standing up with renewed energy, I'd love to try one of those dessert ravioli. For journalistic purposes. Eleanor, no, several people said simultaneously. Come on, after everything we've been through tonight? I'm invested in the full experience now. She grinned at me with something approaching admiration. Sarah, you've created the most memorable dinner party in Patterson and Associates history. The least I can do is commit to the complete artistic vision. The wasabi filling will burn your sinuses for hours, Diana warned. Perfect. My readers love authenticity. Eleanor grabbed a ravioli from the tray and bit into it without hesitation. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes began streaming instantly, and she made a sound like a tea kettle whistling. But instead of reaching for water, she grabbed her phone and started voice recording between gasps. Holy shit, this is incredible, she wheezed into the phone. The commitment to the concept is absolutely uncompromising. Marcus was watching this display with growing horror. Sarah, what were you planning to do with 7 courses of this? I looked at my husband, really looked at him, for the first time all evening. The man who'd thrown away 3 years of my efforts while stealing money from his employer to fund his deception. I was going to make you eat every single bite, I said quietly. While everyone watched. The room fell completely silent as my words hung in the air. Marcus stared at me with a mixture of horror and something that might have been respect, finally understanding the full scope of what he'd narrowly escaped. Every bite, I repeated, holding his gaze. I was going to watch you pretend to enjoy wasabi ravioli and cayenne coffee and salt petit fours while telling everyone how grateful you were for your wife's incredible cooking. Just like you've been doing with my actual food for 3 years. Jim Patterson set down his water glass with deliberate precision. Marcus, clear out your office tomorrow morning. Security will escort you out at 9 a.m. Jim, please. $22,000 in fraudulent expenses. Lying to clients, coworkers, and apparently everyone in your personal life. Jim's voice was ice-cold professional disappointment. The Henderson account's success doesn't excuse criminal behavior. Eleanor, still recovering from the wasabi but somehow managing to type, looked up from her phone. Sarah, I have to ask, what happens now? With your marriage? I looked at Marcus, who was slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. 8 years of marriage, 3 years of daily lies, 18 months of financial fraud. The man I'd loved enough to wake up early for, to research recipes for, to write encouraging notes for in his lunch bag. I don't know, I said honestly. Marcus, why didn't you just tell me you didn't like my cooking? Because you tried so hard, he whispered, not meeting my eyes. You were so proud when you'd master a new recipe. You'd ask me about every ingredient, every technique. How could I tell you that none of it was working? So you decided stealing from your employer was easier than having one honest conversation with your wife? It wasn't supposed to go this far. The first expense report was just panic. Then it became a pattern. Then I had to keep lying to justify the lies. Marcus finally looked up at me. Sarah, I know this is unforgivable, but I never meant to hurt you this badly. Rebecca, who'd been quietly observing from the sidelines, stepped forward with her therapist voice. Marcus, intent doesn't matter when the impact is this devastating. Sarah spent 3 years believing she was failing at something that mattered to her, while you were actively deceiving her and everyone else. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been unusually quiet since the financial revelations, suddenly spoke up. Sarah, dear, what will you do about the kitchen renovation? I blinked, surprised by the practical question. I hadn't thought about it. Because if Marcus has been stealing company money, there will likely be legal proceedings. Asset seizure, restitution payments. She looked at her husband meaningfully. Harold handles white-collar criminal defense. The house might end up in litigation. The reality of my situation hit me like a freight train. Not only was my marriage potentially over, but Marcus's fraud could destroy us financially. The security cameras I'd installed to catch burglars had instead captured evidence that might cost us everything. Diana appeared at my elbow with a business card. Sarah, I meant what I said about consultation work. You have a natural instinct for menu planning and event coordination. Even tonight's chaos was executed flawlessly. Eleanor looked up from her phone. I'm serious about the feature article. This story, the deception, the revenge dinner, the performance art angle, it's going viral before I even finish writing it. You could build a legitimate catering career from the publicity. I stared around the room at 52 people who just witnessed my marriage explode in real time, and felt something unexpected, relief. For the first time in 3 years, everyone knew the truth. Marcus's lies, my revenge, the scope of the deception we'd both participated in. I think, I said slowly, I'm going to start by learning to cook for myself. Marcus looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Sarah. We'll figure out the rest later, Marcus. But first, I'm going to go home and make myself a sandwich. A really good one. And for the first time in 8 years, I didn't ask him if he wanted one too.